of our Global Citizenship online UWC course. My name is Marta Silber. I'm one of the course organizers. And today I have the pleasure to welcome Euri Vidal, who is our Week 4 expert. And Euri is actually a friend of online UWC from the previous course that took place last summer on social entrepreneurship that was organized by online UWC and the International Office. And today we're very excited to hear from him from Italy, where he is going to be launching his first social enterprise, which he designed during the summer course. And we'll hear from him about that and about a couple of other things. So I will let Euri introduce himself in a second, but I just wanted to say a couple of things about our course and about past week in particular. We were really impressed with the quality of your work. It was really incredible to read your contributions. You have done an amazing job. And we now have actually a lot of resources that can be very useful to us in spreading the word about the haze problem. So what we're hoping to do is to let you know how we will go about it in the next couple of days. And for now, we're just asking you to think how you would use the material that you produce to organize a social media campaign to raise awareness about the haze issue in Southeast Asia. So we will be letting you know more about the outreach in the upcoming days. And now let's hear about what Euri's been up to and how he has been looking at a very similar problem that we were looking at for the past week, which is how to engage people in caring about their energy consumption. Euri is also a graduate of the Waterford United World College in Southern Africa, and he has been working with Surefoot Effect on a project called Carbon Conversations, in which actual conversations happen about reducing your carbon footprint. And he also has thought deeply about what works and what doesn't work in these kinds of social enterprises, in particular in terms of engaging people in taking action. So he will now talk a little bit about that, and then we will take your questions and have a bit more discussion about what we can do with our content here with our course and what Euri would advise us how to proceed with our campaign about the haze. So without further ado, Euri, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to today's presentation. So like you have said, I studied at Waterford in Southern Africa, and then I went on to study international development at university in England. And that's when I became concerned about environmental problems and particularly climate change. So all my work ever since has focused on this issue. And this is what I will be speaking about today, about my experience working in climate change and particularly reducing energy consumptions in universities. I will also talk a little bit about behavior change because this is also my area of expertise and it's also my area of interest. And then I will finally relate these two topics to today's theme for the talk, which is consumerism and consumption in the global environment. I will begin speaking about my experience working for the University of Edinburgh. I was in Scotland, where I was hired to start work about 5 years ago. I was hired as an intern to develop an energy-saving campaign in student residencies. So my role really was to engage with students. So obviously this is very relevant to today's topic. What's interesting is that the way our team had thought of this project was to focus on an energy-saving competition. So all the activities that we were meant to be doing had to do with encouraging students to compete with one another to save the most energy and then get a prize for it. What happened once we started the campaign is that there was very little interest from anyone. So we had a table outside the dining hall where all the students ate every day. And we were meant to approach them and ask them to do things like taking pictures of themselves holding a kettle or switching off a light, and then uploading them in Facebook, and then sharing that with their friends. But hardly anyone did that. So we spent a lot of time organizing this energy saving competition. We also spent a lot of time buying gifts or prizes for people, but actually nobody really cared. So this is something that really struck me, and it made me feel that we had to try something different. So at that time I came across a paper called Our Common Cause, which was written by the Worldwide Fund in the UK. And what this paper essentially says is that a lot of the time environmental campaigns try to use the same methods as marketing campaigns for businesses. So essentially trying people to do something by offering them an economic incentive. So whether it's an offer or some price, like in this case. But what they're saying is that when it comes to issues like saving energy and doing other socially responsible things, all these economic incentives don't actually work. Because the principle is that once you remove the economic incentive, then people stop doing it, because they do it only for this incentive, not because they really believe in it. So what this paper advises environmental organizations, for example, is to work with deeper values. So address people's own values, so a sense of responsibility or generosity and things like that, and that's what works. So I took into account some of the ideas presented in this paper, and I sort of changed the focus of our energy saving campaign. So now, instead of giving people prizes, what I did was to ask people simply to help me to save energy. And actually, the response was great. We went from having no interest in our campaign to having a lot of supporters. So, and it was cheaper as well, because we didn't have to spend money on prices. So for me, this was a big change in the way I understood things. And I was lucky enough that at the time I was an intern, they came a proposal by a few colleagues to do a wider sort of energy saving campaign in the university. So then we together wrote what we call face-to-face engagement. And essentially what face-to-face means is that we had to speak to people directly, people who worked in different buildings around campus. So we selected one building, which was called the Ashworth Labs, which was a biological sciences building. And our assumption was that people, once again, people wanted to help, people wanted to save energy. But then now we understood that maybe the reason why people sometimes don't save energy is because they have not been offered a place where they can discuss energy issues. So for example, traditional energy saving campaigns focus on printing out information, let's say a poster, with information about how to save energy. So for example, telling people to turn off lights, telling people to switch off their computer once they're not using it, and things like that. We thought that these actions saved very little energy, and we wanted to do a lot more. So our main assumption was that in this building that we selected, there would be some people who wanted to go one step forward and explore new ways to save energy. So then we decided that our role was to find who these people were, if there were any people at all. So what we did, we held an initial event, which happened after, in this one building, in the Ashworth Labs. Every week there was a guest lecturer. And after this lecture was given, everybody sort of met together in one room, which was called the Darwin Dance Room. And then people would have drinks and some food. And then we took this opportunity to then speak to everybody. And then we said to people, okay, we want to save energy in this building, but we know that you guys are already doing the most basic things. You already all know that you have to turn off lights when you're not in a room, or you have to turn on your computer. So obviously there is no point in telling you all these things again, right? So then we said, okay, so what if you guys thought of new ways to save energy? Because we come here, we have knowledge on things like carbon emissions and climate change, but we don't actually know what kind of equipment you're using here. So then actually we were amazed because lots of people wanted to do that. And I'll just give you an example of my favorite project, which was actually the most successful one. It was someone who was doing research on, he was working with cells. So he was working in a lab where he was using two fridges that worked at minus 80 degrees Celsius. So he thought, okay, I know as a matter of fact that these two freezers don't need to work at minus 80 degrees. They can actually work at minus 70 and it doesn't damage the cells I'm working with. So what he did on his own time, and because he wanted to, because he was interested in the topic, was to measure the electricity consumption of these two freezers for 1 week. So in one freezer, he measured it working at minus 80 degrees and the other one at minus 70 degrees. And he found out that the freezer working at minus 70 degrees saved up to 1/3 of the electricity consumption. The reason why the difference is so big is because for a freezer to work at minus 80 degrees is very hard. It takes a lot of extra energy. Whereas at minus 70, even if it's only 10 degrees more, 10 degrees up, then because of the technology, maybe in the future it won't, but at the present, with the present technology, it uses a lot of electricity. So, okay, this project was interesting because of the amount of energy that he managed to save, also because it proved us right. So we knew that lots of people were interested in saving energy, but it also saved enough money in only 8 weeks to pay for the cost of our project. So basically, what we were costing the university to do this project, we saved enough energy to pay for it in only 8 weeks. And at that time, the university considered that any energy efficient investment that would be 4 years was a good investment, and we saved it in only 8 weeks. So after this, actually convincing the university to do more work was really easy because we were saving lots of money. In fact, so we ran this pilot project for 5 weeks. It was 3 of us, and then the pilot project became a 3-month project, and then it became 6 of us, and we saved about £20,000. And then the project became a 1-year project when we saved £80,000. And then again, the university was so happy with our work that they created the sustainability and social responsibility department within the university. So this was a really sort of big step. We also worked we didn't save energy only. We also used our face-to-face engagement approach to let people know about recycling, sustainable transport, etc. So it was also really good in this area. Now that I've explained how the project worked, I would like to just mention that for me, saving energy at the University of Edinburgh wasn't enough. It's all well and good that I save some energy, but I wanted to have a bigger impact. So I took this one project about the freezers, which saved, just for you guys to know, this will mean nothing, but it saved 50 tons of carbon dioxide in 1 year. But this number is important because what I did, I worked out how many of these projects would be needed to happen every year at the University of Edinburgh for the university to stop producing carbon emissions at all by 2050. This is what the scientific community says that as the world should do by 2050 to avoid dangerous climate change from happening. So we have to become carbon neutral by 2050. So I was interested, just out of curiosity, how much effort, let's say, would be needed at the University of Edinburgh. So it came to 51 projects. So let's say that if 51 people that came up with ideas like the freezer project developed projects similar to that one every year at the university until 2050, then the university would become carbon neutral. This is so 51, as you can imagine, is a very small amount of people if we think that the university has 37,000 combined staff and students. And then I was also interested to know this number for the whole world. And again, is a relatively very small number of people. It comes to less than 1% of the world's population every year. And okay, so obviously it is still a large number of people, but if you think about it in proportional terms, is very small. And I think this is very important for everybody to know, because it's important to know that we can all make a really big difference if we try. And I would like you guys to take this away with you today. Okay, so obviously I learned a lot about behavior change working for the University of Edinburgh. I had been interested in behavior change for a long time. I wrote my university undergraduate thesis on behavior change. And at that time, I came across a book called Human Behavior and Environmental Problems, which was very enlightening. And there was one particular research study that I came across when reading this book, and it was a study done in California, where researchers interviewed people living near a large dam. So what they were interested in discovering was how fearful people were. So their assumptions were that the closer people lived to the dam, the more fearful they would be that this dam would burst. And it was true. So they found out that this was true, except for the villagers that were closest to the dam. So for these villagers, people there, instead of being really afraid that the dam would burst, they actually experienced no fear at all. So the researchers found that this was very sort of unusual and strange. And they concluded that the reason why people living closest to the dam were not afraid at all is because they kind of went into denial, because the danger was so great that if they had experienced the proportional fear that would be expected, then they would not have been able to cope with anything. They would just be afraid all the time. So I was interested in this theory because it kind of makes me think of climate change a little bit the same. Climate change is such a big problem for everybody. Even governments are not quite sure how to avoid it. That it almost feels like we are so afraid of it that we go into denial. So sometimes we tend not to think about it because it's too hard. And I'm interested in this because I want to change that. I want to change the way we look at climate change, and I want to encourage people not to be afraid and to look at climate change in sort of a hopeful way. And this is why I work for the sure food effect, like Marta mentioned. For example, we often hear, when you open a newspaper, for example, you get a lot of, and there is an article about climate change, you often get pictures of future catastrophe, you know, like floods, hurricanes, sea level rise, and things like that. So basically what I've been learning all these years is that actually this kind of information, instead of making more people take part in fighting climate change, what it actually does is to discourage people. Because we kind of don't like, people in general, we don't like hearing bad stories all the time. We can hear some like bad stories sometimes, but if it's all the time, then we have a tendency to then not want to hear anymore from a certain subject. So this is why I'm interested in behavior change, and this is why I work for the Sure Food Effect and Carbon Conversations. So Carbon Conversations is a program that was developed in Cambridge a few years ago. And basically what the course does is encourages people to meet in groups to discuss ways to reduce their carbon footprint in their personal lives. And the reason why the program encourages people to meet in groups is because it understands that some of the changes that we have to make in our lives are quite difficult, actually. So some things are not easy. And by providing group support, then people find it easier to make changes in their lives. So since the program was launched in 2009, more than 3,000 people have taken it in the UK, and statistically, everyone reduces their carbon footprint by 1 ton of CO2 on average. This is in the UK, where the average carbon footprint is 12 tons, more or less between 10 and 12 tons, depending on the source. And then the course is divided in 4 topics, one of which is actually consumption. So this is also very relevant for today's talk. Okay, so again, because I'm interested in behavior change and I deal a lot with people's stories of change in carbon conversations, I am very much interested in what stories can do to help other people, reduce their carbon footprint and their environmental impact. And this is actually what I want to focus my social enterprise on, the social enterprise that I'm launching in Italy this week, as Marta said earlier. So I had some pictures prepared for a presentation, but we had a few technical problems, but I will just describe it. So there is an open air museum in The Hague in the Netherlands, and maybe some of you guys know about it. It's called Fairy Tales by the Sea. So if you Google this, you will find lots of pictures. So these are metal sculptures that are placed in a promenade in The Hague, so by the sea. And basically, usually, everyone who walks by the promenade, which is probably like hundreds of people every day, at least in summer, they see these sculptures and they stop to look at them. And the children even play with them because they're made of metal, and quite clearly that's what they are for. So this got me thinking into how sort of fictional characters could help the sustainability message, or like how to get sustainability ideas to people who don't work in this field, so people who don't work saving energy, or people who don't work in sustainable transport and things like that. So what I want to do with my social enterprise is develop, using stories from people to develop characters, so kind of fictional characters that people sort of can relate to. And use them to develop a story. So I was actually having the idea of creating a family of 6 people who actually live in the future. So it's 2 grandparents and the parents, and then 2 children. So the grandparents invent this time machine, and they travel back in time to the year 2015. But then the machine gets broken. So the only way they have to fix this machine is to be reminded of the things of all the actions that people did between 2015 and 2050 to make the world carbon neutral. So this is kind of an initial way to get people more interested in the subject. Okay, so, and then just to finish my brief talk, I wanted to focus a little bit more on today's topic, consumption and consumerism. Again, like I said, this is something that we touch on in the program Carbon Conversations. And I just wanted to talk about 3 main things that I think are important when we think about consumption. So the first one is identity. So it has become quite clear that the reason why consumption is encouraged in all sort of walks of life. It's because it contributes to economic growth, which is, like in the 21st century, is one of the most important things in the world, economic growth. And it is understood that societies sort of function a little bit because of economic growth and because of the employment that it offers and things like that. But then what we find interesting in carbon conversations is that things create identities. So it could be summarized in the sentence, I have, therefore I am, or I am defined by the things that I have. And the whole culture around brands, for example, is quite important like that. So some people feel identified with their friends or with the people they hang around with because of the things they buy, like what kind of cell phone or car and things like that. And this is what brands do, actually. They create identities so that people keep buying them. So it's interesting. There is one thing called the Happiness Development Index, which is an alternative index to the sort of GDP index. So the Happiness Development Index ranks countries according to how well they do globally, but not only in terms of economic growth, but also in terms of sustainability. So this is quite interesting. And there are now some studies that are trying to make a connection between income, so how much a person earns, and how happy they are. And what they are finding is that people on like high incomes are actually not that much happier. And in fact, sometimes they're even unhappier. Because one other interesting thing about consumption is that it can be quite stressful. So instead of, we have this idea that the more options we have of things to buy, that makes us happier. But actually, too many options can make us very, very unhappy, because we are constantly trying to decide which one is the best. And once we decide on one, then we realize that we missed out on many others that we couldn't do, and that makes us unhappier. So it's quite interesting, actually. Okay, so the second thing that I thought it was important to talk about is inequality. So when I say inequality, I'm talking about, for example, our generation, how much access to things we have, and how much access to the things that we have today, our children will have, for example. So, and specifically in terms of oil, because it's also very relevant to climate change, Western economic development is in a way dependent on cheap oil. So the kind of the lifestyles that we can enjoy today, at least in the West, in Europe and the US, are possible because oil was discovered sort of a century and a half ago, and it was a cheap natural resource that was sort of easily exploitable, and it just created all the wealth that we have today. But we also know that cheap oil, we are running out of cheap oil, so there will be oil for a long time, but exploiting it in such a cheap way will not be possible for much longer. Now we are in a global economic recession, and oil is slightly cheaper. But generally, if the world economy was in a better shape, oil would be becoming more and more expensive. So we need to be aware that we are burning oil today, or coal, or all these resources at the expense of what our children will be able to do. So I think it is important to acknowledge that it is our responsibility to make sure that we develop the world economy in a way that our children can enjoy the same lifestyles. And we cannot do that with fossil fuels. We need to change the way the world economy works. And we need to change the base of the source of the energy, of what powers the world economy. And this is not only important for future generations, it's also important for people living today in not such wealthy countries, because we are also taking resources, and we need to share resources in a better way. So, for example, an European has levels of consumption that would need sort of 3 planets, whereas an African or an Ethiopian, they use a lot less resources. They don't need so much land and water and things like that. And then finally, I just wanted to say that even when we have, let's say, high salaries or high incomes, when what we do with that money is very important, because there are different things we can do. Some things have a higher environmental impact than others. So, for example, I have a friend in Edinburgh who started also her own social enterprise, and she makes salads and she delivers these salads on her bike. So, she's making money, but what she does has a low environmental impact. There is a lot of talk in environmental circles about certain activities that have very low impact. For example, there is a lot of talk about buying experiences and instead of buying things. So, instead of buying a new phone, why don't you spend a week with your friends in the country, and you sort of share experiences, and get to know each other and things like that. It's just a different way to spend money that has a lower environmental impact. Okay, and just to conclude, part of my social enterprise is to do with actually sharing all these stories of positive change. So I'd like to create an online platform where anyone working on this issue, saving energy and saving resources and saving carbon emissions, can upload their stories, and maybe, things like pictures, videos, so that other people elsewhere in the world can access them and maybe do the same, or maybe, get ideas to start new projects and also share them with other people. So yeah, I think, if anyone was interested, then I'll be doing lots of this kind of work in the next months and probably years, hopefully.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Euri, for your amazing presentation. I learned so much from you about a lot of things that I had some basic understanding, but now I think I have a more profound understanding about the projects that you've done, but also about the issues that we're facing and what are the sort of cutting edge researchers thinking about them nowadays, because this is your field, so you are quite well informed in that regard. I just wanted to say that this is great news also for us, because we have a lot of students who would like to get involved in a project. So do you see maybe a possibility of having some volunteers from our course at some point to join your social enterprise and to help you out a little bit with some tasks?
Sure, yeah, definitely. I mean, again, because I deal a lot with personal stories in Carbon Conversations, I like to hear more about what people do, and it's always interesting to hear, so if anyone in the course was interested in sort of exploring how they do, for example, without buying things for 1 week or 1 month, and then write it down and write down their experience and that sort of thing. This is something that I would like to work with, because I would like to share it in a blog and then develop the idea further. So anyone who's interested should definitely let me know.
Great. We will be sharing that with the whole course on our course website, and I will also make sure to upload your slides that we unfortunately couldn't see today because of the weak internet connection that we have, but they will be available, so the students and everyone who's interested will be able to see what those statues look like, because they're really quite adorable, and they really do transmit an interesting message about how fictional characters can get us interested about things that maybe ordinary wouldn't be interested in, and create an awareness about those abstract issues that we're being challenged by. One of the challenges that our students found is that it's very difficult to care about things that don't concern us immediately, don't present an immediate danger to us. So it was great to hear from you that there's a scientific explanation for that deals with our mammalian brain and how we just cannot handle certain dangers, and so we shut down in a sense. So there's a reason for that, but that still doesn't quite excuse us from trying to take action and trying to do something about it. So that's what we're doing now. But I think that there are a lot of very interesting questions for you. So maybe let's take a look at some of them, and then we can come back to the issues about the course and talk a little bit more specifically about how students can get involved. I've been looking at this question for a while now. let's see if I can bring it up for everyone to see. Carlos, hi Carlos, excellent question. So he's been asking, which do you think is the key to convince and make the people get involved in reducing their energy consumption and in taking action for a better environment? So we've been kind of talking about that already, but if you were just to name one or two key ideas.
Sure. Yeah, actually, this is a great question. Also related to what I was saying about my experience working with at the University of Edinburgh with face-to-face engagement. One of the things that we found is that, and one of the main reasons why we launched this pilot project is because we know that people who are told to do things are less likely to do them. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when people are told to turn off lights, they are less likely to turn off lights than if they're presented with a different kind of if they're giving questions, essentially. So we worked a lot around the idea of giving people questions. So our approach was based on the principle that we should never tell anyone what to do. So in their place of work, we should always ask them to think. And this is what really gets people interested. Somehow this is also that seems to be quite universal. Like, we as people don't like to be told to do certain things. But if we are asked for our opinion and our sort of experience, then we become interested. And this was actually the success of the project. So yeah, I think this is a very important thing to take into account. Obviously, this works reducing energy in a university environment. It might be slightly different in other fields, like things like forestry, or it really depends on the situation. But this is a very important thing to consider when speaking with any kind of audience, because sometimes some people are reluctant. Oh, and actually, maybe this is another important point. Perhaps you've already realized that, okay, there are some people who do not believe that climate change is real, or that climate change is happening, or that is man-made. So I've come across skeptical people like this before, and sometimes it is really quite important not to talk about climate change. I think what's important, and what everyone seems to agree on, which is really good, is that saving energy and saving resources is important. Everyone seems to agree on that. So sometimes it's also important not to focus too much on the big problem, climate change, because some people don't necessarily agree with it. Let's just focus on what we can do. Great. And what we can do is everyone sort of agrees with. So.
Yeah, that sounds like a great way of reframing the problem and making it really solvable. So that was a great question. Let's take a look at another question, also from Carlos. What can a nation do if it doesn't have enough money to invest it in renewable energies, in more environmentally friendly processes and products? That's a tough one.
This is actually a very interesting question. Okay, so last summer I went back to Swaziland, which is where I studied in the UWC, and as you may already know, Swaziland is one of the poorest countries in the world. Yet, what they are doing in terms of sustainability is quite amazing. And in fact, I was really impressed. Even though it's a poor country, they're investing a lot of money on sustainability because they see it as essential. So it's almost like a poor country like Swaziland is investing proportionally more of their own resources in sustainable alternatives to their economic development than other countries in Europe, for example. So I think there is a misconception about how much money a country has and what a country can do in terms of sustainability. There is also another interesting case that I've read a lot about, and it's Bhutan, the country of Bhutan. So Bhutan became the first country maybe a couple of years ago where only organic food is grown. So even though Bhutan is supposedly also one of the poorest countries in the world, they do a huge amount for the environment. So I think wealth is not necessarily an obligation almost when it comes to sustainability. I know that there are a lot of there is a lot of argument for saying that developing countries don't have the resources, but I am not sure that's the case. And I think every country has their own possibilities to make their economies and their societies more sustainable. Obviously, they will be different for each country, but I think each country can do a lot.
That's very interesting. I did not know that about Swaziland, but I'm really glad that there is no direct correlation between wealth and sustainability efforts in that sense, that the situation is more complex. That is actually very, very helpful to know, but also makes it a more optimistic picture. So that's a great question. I'm glad that we got to hear about that. So let's now go to Irene's question. Hi, Irene. This is another excellent question. The Western world, and she puts Western in quotation mark, built its wealth over a century thanks to burning coal and oil. Isn't it hypocritical now to ask developing countries to reduce the burning of fossil fuels?
This is a question that I've come across before. Well, once again, I think that it's important to notice that developing a sustainable economy is not necessarily bad for developing countries. I think there is a lot of potential. We need to understand that a lot of the time, fossil fuels are bought. There are only some oil-producing countries in the world, let's say. So developing your own source of energy surely is good for your country's economy. So, for example, South Africa is developing their renewable energy sort of potential because they have a lot, and they understand that this brings economic growth. In fact, it is one particular province of South Africa, the Western Cape, because there isn't a lot of coal there. So they are developing wind energy because that creates jobs, which is good for everyone, and jobs create wealth. So I think that is a good way to look at the problem. And also we need to think also that there is a trade of wealth between more developed and more undeveloping countries, and that even though it is developed countries that have been using all this oil and other resources for the last 2 centuries, this wealth, or maybe not so much the wealth, but at least the expertise that has been developed in all this time is useful to developing countries. So we need to also understand that in some ways it is easier for developing countries today to develop certain economic activities because of the experience of the Western countries. So I think it's important not to, even though I do still think that developed countries in Europe, the US, Australia, etc., they do need to do a lot more. I do agree with that. But I think it has to be a global effort, really, and that once again, creating sustainable economies is a very good thing for developing countries to do, because it creates jobs and wealth and markets, etc.
And those economies are going to be with us in the next generations to come. So there's that incentive to really focus on that and think about the future, right? But I think this question really is quite a challenging one. So it's good that we had a chance to ask ourselves that, because we can always ask, right? And then hopefully there will be a response, and it will be a positive response. But I don't think that asking questions necessarily needs to be forbidden, or that we should feel like we are not working within one system. I think questions are the way to get to know a problem deeply. So we should always feel encouraged to ask them. So I have another question here. So this is from Aditya. Hi. This is a question about Asia. Reports say that Asia will become the leading energy use and emission source in the coming years. What are the prospects for limiting carbon emissions?
This is actually, yeah, this is a very good question as well. So yes, you're right. I don't know in terms of Asia in general, but China in particular has become the biggest emitter of carbon emissions already. So it is the most polluting country in the world in that sense already, ahead of the US. This happened a couple of years ago again. Obviously, this is in absolute terms. So per person, every Chinese person still emits less than any American person, and this is into account. But as a country, China is the biggest emitter already. But what is also interesting is that China is also has also become one of the leading countries when it comes to renewable energy. You know, so there is a lot of wind energy being developed and solar energy. So China is actually gradually reducing its own carbon emissions already, because the Chinese government also understands that there is no way that China will manage the development the government sort of envisions with fossil fuels, because of, like I said earlier, oil is becoming more expensive, and China knows that it will not be able to develop on cheap oil for a long time. So they understand this issue, and they're developing renewable energy quite fast, which is very heartening. And in fact, there are even some people saying already that because global emissions have been rising for over a century, nearly 2 centuries now. And it seems that they might actually be reaching a peak now. And some people are beginning to say that that might be, okay, it's partly because of the economic downturn, but it's partly because of the way China is developing its renewable energy industry. So this is actually really heartening. And yes, these countries are doing loads. So this is really good news.
Right. So there is a focus on Asia now. I think that this question is a very interesting one to ask, but it is also complex because of the fact that a lot of work to reduce energy is being done. And now we have a question from Elena. Hi, Elena. So what can schools do in order to make people improve their relationship with the environment and reduce their carbon footprint? What can schools do?
Okay, I don't have a specific experience in schools, but I know I went on a trip last year around. I visited a few cities in Spain, and I came across a lot of cities that were working with schools. And I guess they worked at different levels. So again, engaging students. I actually think there is a lot of potential in schools, because it sounds like students are very, or let's say younger people are very keen on environmental issues, much more so than even my generation, right? Because I learned things at school, but I think people now are learning a lot more. So I think there is a lot of potential. And I think more and more teachers and more schools are beginning to really push and encourage their students to take part in projects. And I think some of the elements that were described to me last year are similar to face-to-face engagement. So really finding other ways to get students involved and develop their ideas, and having their own sort of even their own games and things like that. And actually, one other thing, and I think this is something that schools could really develop, is that children then take the message to their parents, and often their parents don't know much about environmental issues, because 30 years ago it was not really an issue. So I think that the big potential is there in the message that children, youngsters can take to their parents. I think this is very important.
Yeah, that's great. So that takes me back to asking about how we can effectively bring about that outreach that is what is on our minds in the course this week and will be even more so next week, because we are right now trying to tell the whole world, the whole global community about the haze problem in Southeast Asia. So I'm wondering if you were one of us, or either a student in the course or someone who maybe wasn't familiar with the problem, what can we do to spread the word, and how can we help to reduce the amount of haze in the atmosphere from afar, sort of in a remote way? Do you have any suggestions for us, for the students, as to how they can reach out, and whom would they contact or talk to, especially in terms of social media, because we're thinking that it might be a good idea for them to try to initiate conversations and send messages to entities, institutions, people with what they're finding and start the dialogue. So do you have any suggestions for us as to what could be effective? What do you think will be effective?
I think one thing that I've learned while living in England and Scotland is that people engage a lot with their local representatives. So whether it's by means of sending a letter to bringing up a certain issue, or to referring to one of the things that a local representative has said, and at least in the UK, is quite effective. I am not sure about how effective it will be in the countries where this is an issue, but I think maybe, yeah, the first step would be to contact the local representative, and then try to make them understand the issue, and then because often they also can point out how to get media attention. They have lots of contacts and things like that. So obviously we know that not all of them will reply, but actually, at least in my experience, there is always someone who replies and someone who listens to you. So I think definitely it's worth trying. I'd say this is maybe something good to do in the local area.
Mm-hmm.
And then how we can help from afar. I think again we need to build a sort of global movement that reduces all this pollution, and also even developing the technology so that people in other countries, in other places, don't need cleaner technologies and things like that. I think this is also really important. I mean, it might be a bit redundant to say, but if you are interested in a career in renewable energies, for example, you could make a huge difference in your life. So this is something that I think every young person should consider, whether you can make a career of your interests in sustainability and create new technologies and new ways to reduce pollution worldwide. It doesn't have to be in technology either. I think socially speaking is also very important. So understanding culture and understanding how people think, how people change again, which is also my experience, is also very important. I mean, I am not an engineer. I'm a social scientist, but certainly for the work I do, this was essential. All this knowledge was essential.
So that's a great idea, because now the students can think about it as a bigger network of individuals who can work together, such as local political authorities, and maybe for contacting those we would need people on the ground or somebody with the knowledge of local language or translators. And then we can also think about engineers from maybe big companies that exist out there in the world that they could ask these questions to, and ask them, what are you doing about the haze problem? So that's
And
a
actually,
really, yeah.
one more thing I wanted to say is that, again, the traditional approach has been to blame corporations, government, etc. But I think it's also important again to change this discourse and focus on who is doing it right, who are the people who are doing a great job, and sort of spread that message,
Right.
So in all these places, there will be people who are doing the right thing, and I think we also need to hear their story.
Right, I
Because
think
that's
that
what
will
really
be,
inspires people elsewhere.
sure, I think we'll be encouraging everyone to try to find stories that will show us that there is something being done that we just maybe are not familiar with. And definitely the tone of these communications needs to be of curiosity, not of accusation or anything that can really discourage the communication and discourage the dialogue. So we'll definitely be passing on that information to everyone in the course. And the last thing I want to ask you is, can you tell us a little bit more about what you will be doing in Italy, or what you're doing in Italy right now, and just give a few words of advice to everyone who's interested in doing their own social enterprise, sort of the way you did it, which is you designed it during the short course that we ran at the online UWC this summer, and now you're doing it. So it's all happening. It's just a couple of months and you're on the ground, you're getting the ground running for your project. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about that, what you're doing there.
Sure. Yeah, it's actually really exciting. 2 months ago, I had only a few ideas in my head, and now I'm here. I'm in Italy, and it's happening. So essentially, what I wanted to do was to take the face-to-face engagement model developed at the University of Edinburgh to universities in other places. And the reason why I chose Italy is because there are not many Italian universities that already have sustainability projects in place. So I thought Italy could potentially be a good place to start a conversation. And I found out that this is the case. I also contacted universities in the Netherlands, and I am visiting the Netherlands again in about a couple of weeks, a couple of universities in the Netherlands. So there is also some interesting coming from the Netherlands. So I want to do similar work as the one in Edinburgh, but I would also like to develop, like I explained earlier, the model with creating fictional characters to involve more people who are not necessarily working in sustainability issues. And the last thing that I would like to develop in this social enterprise is to give some of the money created through the energy savings to projects outside the university. So for people who want to start their own sort of low impact project, I think it would be very good if they had some support. And I think this energy saving could generate some cash to support their ideas, their projects. And I think in a way this is perhaps the most exciting part of the project, to support others to get the ball going. And I suppose in terms of advice for people who are interested in social enterprises or how to start their own projects, I think it's important to understand what you want to do quite well. It's important to really believe in something and be passionate about it, but also pay attention to how you would go, the sort of the different steps that you would need to develop your idea. And your idea will change. And in fact, I know that my idea changed quite a lot from day one, when I had a certain idea what I wanted to do to today, when I suppose there has been a lot of development going on. For me, selecting the country was a key issue, and I guess also Italy is a good place perhaps to do this kind of work, because Italy pays the third highest electricity prices in the European Union, and that makes saving energy sort of even more important. So what I'm saying is that it's important to understand that for any idea, there will be better places than others. And I think finding those better places is quite key, because you might find that your project idea encounters many obstacles in one place, but if you take it to another place, actually it will be a lot easier. And I think part of the process is to understanding who will support your idea where.
Where
That has definitely been very helpful to me.
Where you have the likelihood of making the biggest impact and creating positive change. Thank you so much, Euri. Our time is almost up, so we will continue this conversation in this week's Hangouts, and we thank you all for joining us, and also thank you to our speaker for this great presentation, and we would like to wish you that your social enterprise becomes very successful very quickly, and that we can join you in it, and we'll be telling our students how to get involved in a blog post on Learning Circle, so stay tuned for that.
Thank you guys, it was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
It was our pleasure. Thank you so much, Euri.
Okay.
Bye everyone.
Bye.